I got to get it back in my pocket. Thanks for your patience. All right. Well, welcome. Happy Religious Life Sunday. It's kind of like the Super Bowl, right? Super Bowl Sunday? Yeah, but for monks and nuns and Christian communities in the Episcopal Church. So, welcome. And you may be wondering, what is Carol wearing? And why is she speaking today? Well, I'm going to come out. I am a professed member of a Christian community. I took vows, solemn vows, this past fall in St. Hildegard's community. It was not a new community to me. I sort of grew up with them. I first met them when I was 26 and living in Austin. I had just moved there. I knew it was a place I could either go to seminary or come out, but probably not both at the time. I moved there in 1997, and the reason I even found them was that a few years ago I'd been visiting the seminaries there before that, and I saw this flyer in a coffee house, and it said, "Come do contemplative art." I'm like, what? Oh my gosh. I had been doing contemplative prayer, I had been doing art, and these people had stuck them together. So I took one of the flyers, and I kept it, and when I was unpacking in Austin, I found that flyer, and I wrote to the person and the address that was on it. And I got a call a couple days later, and they said, "That is so weird." "Yeah, I know, I got it a few years ago." And she said, "No, this is the weird part. I haven't taught that class for 3 years, but I'm teaching it again, and it starts in 2 weeks. Do you want to be part of it?" And I said, "I think I better." And I was delighted. And that's how I came to them, through their servant leadership school. It was they offered classes in the fall and in the spring, 10 weeks, and it was deep community. And you shared from your personal life as we read the Psalms and the parables, and as we read books like Engaging the Powers and books by Carter Hayward, who I would later have as a professor at Episcopal Divinity School. And we shared from our lives, and it was a vulnerable process. And it was also the process that held me while I came out and while I dismantled my own fundamentalist ideas of the Bible and of God. And you know, when you throw your worldview out the window like that, and your ideas of God change so much, it's kind of hard to get out of bed in the morning sometimes. And this community held me. They called, my friend Kathleen from the community called me every morning for a few months to see if I was getting out of bed. And people just leaned on each other. And it was authentic community, and that was kind of their thing. And so when I discerned a call to go to seminary, it was through St. Hildegard's. And at the time, they said, "Well, you can't be ordained here because you're openly gay, but we think you should go to seminary." And so I did. And while I was in seminary, I learned that there were monks and nuns in the Episcopal Church. This was new to me. Anybody here know there were monks and nuns in the Episcopal Church? A few people? Yeah? Have you ever heard of Christian communities as part of the religious order and religious life? Well, I visited the SSJE brothers in Cambridge. They had this beautiful stone monastery down by the river, and they prayed 5 times a day. They wore robes all the time. I went on a retreat in their monastery, and I worked in their publishing house as an editor of books while I was in seminary. And they're a religious order in the traditional sense. So I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget it. There are 23 religious orders in the Episcopal Church. They share all of their resources in common. They live and work together in a monastery. They take vows that we heard in the collect of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And they make a lifetime commitment to being in community together. Now, this group is called Aurora. And all the groups that are religious orders make up the Conference of Anglican Religious Orders in the America. So just so you know, now you know, you're learning things. I learned things too from them. And we also had a woman who dressed kind of like this, who worked in our seminary office, and she was part of a Christian community, a sisterhood that had also taken vows, like the monks down the street, and lived by a rule of life and the constitution of that community. But she did not live in a monastery. And she was part of a Christian community just like I am. And I did not take the vows, the big original 3 vows of religious community. I took vows of opening to Christ Sophia, a commitment to cultivating compassion, and to loving the earth. And these are deep, just like anyone's vows that they take. They have a deep meaning for us, and they come out of a time of tremendous discernment that the St. Hildegard's community went through. When Kate and I were living in a community that we helped found, Casa Mariposa in Tucson, St. Hildegard's was discerning their future. Their priests needed to retire. What were they going to do? And so they went on these retreats together, and they really, really listened to the Holy Spirit. They did not intend to become a Christian community. They were a Eucharistic community. They gathered for church on Sunday, and they had the servant leadership school classes. And the Spirit surprised them. Those people who were there when it happened said it felt like Pentecost in the parish hall. They felt so sure that this was a call to become a community. And shortly after that, 7 people took the first vows, the professed members. And then a few years after that, the priest said to me, you know, we're getting another group together to do discernment about taking vows. And I immediately said, I want to be part of that. It wasn't the first time I'd heard of St. Hildegard, and I really doubt when Jesus came up to the brothers in the gospel that was the first time they'd ever seen him. They just knew. I just knew that I was called to this community. Because when I lived in Austin, I went to hear my friend preach. I didn't go to church that much with them at the beginning because they were a little different, let me tell you. They met in a circle, and you had to look at each other. They never used Father or Lord in their liturgy. They only used inclusive language for God. They made up their own songs. They made up their own Eucharistic prayers that they sung. And it was kind of unclear who was in charge. They just, because they sat in a circle, you just didn't know what was going on. And I was a little weirded out by it. And they shared so deeply after the sermon. They shared their hearts with vulnerability about their lives. And I was not used to doing that. That's not what coffee hour's for, is it? And so it took me a while to get used to it. And I went one Sunday because my friend was preaching. And I stood there in the circle that we form around the altar when we do communion. And I looked from face to face. And I thought, man, I really love these people. I know them, and they know me. And I had this kind of sense, this almost a voice, but not really a voice. You know what I mean? And it said, this is your community. Whether you like it or not, whether you know it or not, this is your community. And so when Judith, our priest, said, we're going to do another round of professed members and you can do discernment for a couple of years about that, I knew this is my community. Yes, I want to do this. And I was transformed by St. Hildegarde's, and I think church should transform us. And one of their charisms is to recreate the church. And they do so through writing liturgies, through having authentic community. And now, as we're a dispersed community, the members are able to be part of other churches and to share some of the things that we have found as gifts and through the Spirit. When we have a calling, it can be big or small. Some of you may be called to be teachers, or be lawyers, or to be a kind neighbor. Some of you may be called to work with those who are on the margins of our society. Some of you may be called to be a good parent. Some of you may be called to be daughters of the king, which is also an order in the Episcopal Church. Though they don't live together in a monastery, they have a rule of life and commit to prayer and service. And we'll get to see some of their work later today. But how do we know when God is calling us? Well, like in the gospel, Jesus came to them. God comes to us. God is constantly calling us. It's like God is just breathing out creative love and life into the world. And we can listen for that and feel it. St. Hildegard says, "I am a feather on the breath of God." In silence and prayer, we can step away from the noise and listen and rest on that breath. It's often in a still, small voice that God speaks. So by making time in our life, we can listen for God. I want you to think about a question today. We asked this question at St. Hildegard's. It's, how are you being called to do your loving in the world in this time and place? How are you called to do your loving in the world in this time and place? At St. Hildegard's, we take a time for reflection and silence after the sermon, and then we share from our own lives how the readings, the songs, the words have touched us in our own life. So I'm going to ask us to try it on. We'll have a minute of silence, and then I'll ask you to turn to somebody beside you and just share what came to you in the reflection. Or maybe you'll share how God is calling you. And I invite you to take that question with you. How are you being called to do your loving in the world? Every call is an invitation to loving more deeply. All right, let's reflect for a moment. someone near you. Just talk about what came to you in the time of reflection, or where is God calling you now?